Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler, and my guest is my partner in history, Audrey Langlois, who is no stranger to this show, and we're here to talk about what other? Northeast Kingdom history.
Yes.
And to tell you the truth, I've had a lot of guests over the years. I mean, I've had dozens and dozens, but I love you coming on. You are the female younger version of me.
I don't know if it's a good thing, but I'll take it.
No, I love your enthusiasm for Northeast Kingdom history because there's a lot of people around the Northeast Kingdom who love its history, but you are the queen of it, and it's your enthusiasm is just so contagious, and you've really become a rock star on the Northeast Kingdom internet scene.
Well, I think I prove a lot of people wrong because when I started, some people, older people, thought like, oh, the younger generation, they're not interested in history and they don't care and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, you just have to adapt to the times. And, like we're just talking about this, like the younger generation want to suddenly go to historical society, but it doesn't mean that they're not interested. Put a lot of pictures online on Facebook and suddenly like, oh my God, and they start asking questions and they're curious. So, and that's what's fueled me, right? Fuel me, the interest of other people and families connecting with each other and people learning about the history of the region. So we're almost at 10,000 people now.
And the thing is, you never know what's going to ignite people's passion.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you or I post something, it seems relatively mundane, and all of a sudden it takes it just goes everywhere.
Well, now I know certain categories. I know when it's a picture for restaurant. Like restaurants, people like to reminiscent on the food that they used to eat when they were young. Jay's Snack Bar, and then there was another one around as well. And people like I forgot the name of the other one. Nips.
Yeah, Nips.
Nips. So then, every time I post a picture of either one of them, like I'll have over 100 comments. The one that burned down near the
Long Branch.
Yeah, the Long Range too. Same thing. I'll know I have 100 comments. It's almost like now a competition on who's, which one had the best fries. Like you should have a real contest at one point, or people asking for old recipes from the meals that they used to order at the restaurants. They were able to find those. So yeah, food, people like food for sure.
Well, just recently they tore down the Orleans County Jail was torn down off of Main Street, and I got wind of it, and I posted photos, and that lit up as well. So it isn't only old stuff that isn't here. It's it's like you even post some current events that relates to history.
Yes.
And the jail just that garnished a lot of discussion. Whether it should have been torn down, whether it should have been kept. And, I suspect a lot of people, some people of your followers are also reminiscent about times that they maybe have served a little time in it.
Yeah, well, I read a lot of stories about how kids, when they were walking back from school, would pass by, and then there would be prisoners talking to them and scaring the hell out of them. So I remember reading those stories. I think Newport has what, how old is Newport officially?
Well, Newport City, it became a city in 1918, but it goes long
Yeah, it
before
way,
that.
way longer than that. Yeah. So I think people like to have certain historical monuments or certain old buildings that will help them reminiscent over the history of the town. Like, and that's what's neat about old towns usually. So I think it was a little bit of that when people noticed that the jail was being torn down. It was another, yeah, like part of like Newport history that was going away. So I think it was a lot of nostalgia there, for sure. I think it caught people off guard, right? Because it wasn't like, I don't know if it had been really advertised before, so people didn't have the time to mourn over, like the building, as well. But it was interesting that a lot of people were asking, what about the historical society of Newport? Like, why is the historical society not doing anything? And we had to step in kind
Right.
of and say, well, first of all, it's it's not really operational right now, but also I don't think you could have done anything about it,
Right,
right?
right.
But I don't think she could have done anything about it. So
Right. And I think whether the jail had to come down, it was like the grandstand. The grandstand was left to decay for so many years. If it wasn't for Roger Cartier and crew to step in, there were active plans to take it down with probably little notice, and then Roger and group stepped in. But with the jail, it was left to decay, and it was probably beyond repair. But some communities are better than others. Newport as a whole. I don't mean as leadership or quote leadership, but I mean as a whole that I think this city has done a horrible job at preserving its history in the sense of its buildings. There's very little left, and some of it was because of fires. But whether it be the old Newport Hotel, which was located where People's Bank is now, or the railroad station. Now, I'm not saying the city leadership is entirely to blame, but I think the city certainly lacks vision. Vision for the future.
well, for sure, like some people were saying, oh, the prison could have been used for as a touristic, like a place to visit.
Right.
Obviously, now it's too late. Like you said, it takes planning, and like just ideas and people that will put them in place. But when it's too late, it's easy to say, oh, it's too late. It's gonna cost too much money, or it's in a bad shape. It's maybe 5 or 10 years ago that you knew if you would not do anything, it would get to that point that you had to do something and think about it. Like, I know in Quebec, like there's the prison in Three Rivers has now not necessarily a museum, but you can spend a night there, right? And it probably, I mean, I saw the pictures that you posted, and they're very similar. Prison. It's a little bit bigger than Three Rivers, but they were able to save it right on time. And now, like they had like old prisoners giving tours at one point. Now you can spend a night there. It's just an attraction, right? And it raises money, and but yeah, like you said, like you need people that have visions to put those things in place.
Before, because I didn't even, like, I certainly hoped somebody walked through it and took photos and such. But just, it weren't too many weeks ago, I posted an article I wrote years ago with John Moore. He remembered, well, John Moore is now gone, and it was Booze and Baked Beans, Boston Baked Beans, the title, something like that was, because during Prohibition, he remembered, because it was overflowing with bootleggers when they were caught, the little lockup, and he was a kid. And he talked about the time that the prisoners handed him out money out through the grates to go and buy a huge bag of Boston Baked Beans. And then during the early part of the 20th century, there was a huge movement of Chinese immigrants coming through being smuggled through the area, and that became a holding station, holding place for Chinese residents who were captured while coming across. So those, I am going to be doing two stories. Actually, I'd already planned them. One woman, she grew up in the house that used to be attached to the jail. That was the jailer's house, and the article, this woman's in her 80s, and it's going to be called The Jailer's Daughter. And she grew up in that house, and she helped feed the prisoners and everything, and she cleaned the courthouse. And I've been in contact with one of the former sheriffs, and I think they're going to, because the sheriff's department was where the jailer's house was. And so I was already in the process of preserving the history even before it was torn down. But, on the positive side, Newport, or Lake Memphremagog as a whole, has wonderful history. I keep on digging and digging, and I learned so much from you, like little tidbits of history.
Yeah, well, I love right now. I've been through like newspapers, like you have done, and it's reading those old newspapers. Sometimes you find those stories, and then it's so interesting. We have a rich history. Like I've had my group for 2 years now, roughly. Not even. In July 1st will be 2 years, and I haven't ran out of pictures and stories. I haven't, like, the Orleans County has so much, right? I haven't tapped into really like what they have. We have a lot at the library as well, in the basement of the library. I haven't even been there yet. So for sure, there's so much history everywhere. And I know people have it sometimes at their own house. They haven't shared it yet. I went to someone's house because they were selling postcards. So I went to their house and they showed me their collection of Newport postcard. And obviously that one was not for sale, but I was like, I had never seen, there were so many pictures of postcards I have never seen before. And they promised me that when they would come back, because they were leaving to Florida, so I'm assuming they're going to come back soon, that they were going to contact me and I would be able to scan them to put them on the Facebook group, because I was like amazed. It's like places I've never seen.
And outside of this area, like you put me onto one story, and it's actually featured, and I forgot to bring you a copy of it. It's actually featured in the April issue of the Journal. It's about these professional safecrackers who came through the area. Portland Fatty and Bangor Billy and crew. And one of the I had to read up on it, but robbing the safes of post offices were once very common, and they stole stamps, they stole money, and these professional gangsters, they really were. They came through the area and they knocked off Morgan, but then they also did Stowe and Bangor Billy. Though Bangor Billy really fell onto bad times. He killed a guy over in New York and got the electric chair. And but I had never heard of that story until you stumbled onto it in a newspaper, and I expanded upon it.
And sometimes just, I remember like telling you, like, I don't have time to dig into it, but there you go. But I don't even remember if I found it first in an American newspaper or a Canadian newspaper, because at that time, like, a lot of criminals that were just going back and forth the border.
Those same guys robbed a bank.
I think in Montreal.
Yeah, probably, and then came south.
Yeah.
And
so that, because a lot of criminals, they would commit a crime in Canada. There's a story like, someone got killed in Eastern Township, and then they ran away in the United States. They were hoping that they would be able to hide in the United States, so because the border is not what it is today. So, but yeah, you find those gems, and sometimes it's a matter of like digging and finding more. Finding more information through newspapers and archives everywhere in the States. I love digging. Like the writing part a little bit less. I think you enjoy the writing part more than I do. I like the digging part. I like just finding all the information, digging through newspapers. I love that part.
And for the viewers and listeners, it isn't that we have to now, because it used to be so labor intensive to go through old newspapers. Is you either had to find old newspapers, go through them, or you had to go to a place like the Vermont Archives or the Vermont State Library that had them on microfilm.
Yeah.
Now I subscribe to newspapers.com, and you can go to almost any paper up until a certain point, like usually like the 1960s.
Yeah.
And if I want to do an article, if I want to find, say I want to do an article on the Newport, it was the Orleans County Jail, the jail that was just torn down. All I have to do is type in Orleans County Jail, and every time that article is mentioned, that jail is mentioned, it pops up.
And you can do the same with a lot of newspapers in Quebec.
Right.
You cannot do it with the Stansted Journal, though. That they are scanned, but you have to read them. Like they haven't been put on the website when you can search keywords. But I know with newspaper.com, though, there are gaps. You said like after like 1963, there's no more Newport Daily Express.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And then like there's a whole as well. Like there's a couple of years that they're not online. And I know the newspaper, I think, has a new editor. She did message through my group that she was looking for
Tabitha Armstrong.
Yeah, so she was looking for histories because she wants to do a history section, right? So she was asking for history stories from people. So she's gonna get an email soon from me asking if she still has archives or newspapers from those years.
Yeah. I think they have some out back. They're very, very fragile. The other place you might find them, they used to have a collection of old newspapers, is the Goodrich. They're probably down in the archives now.
And they might just have like the all the pictures, right? Like, so sometimes people just like to see the pic. Yes, we want to read the article. People like to see the picture. So to share those old pictures too, that's something that I'm looking forward to do eventually.
I love the professional photos, but I find some of the most interesting photos come out of personal collections.
Yeah, you never know.
Is they're not professionally taken, but because Newport or the Northeast Kingdom as a whole has had a long history of having some great photographers who just went around taking photos of streetscapes and events. But I find some of the neatest photos come out of personal collections that people who are willing to share. But I think you and we're able to bounce things off each other. We're not intimidated by each other. Like some people get intimidated by smart people, and you're far smarter than I am. But the thing is, the Canadian side of the history far better than I do, and I probably have a little more in tune with this side, but you can't separate the two.
No.
It's like, for example, I'm writing a series now. It's not a news story, but it's much more in depth. Is the birth of the Burns Theater and the watery death of its owner. And are you familiar, or you probably read where Burns Theater was?
Mm-hmm.
It was where the state office building is now. It was founded by Frank Burns, not from MASH. That was the character on MASH too. But Frank Burns was one of the very first he was one of the early pioneers of the of moving pictures, aka talking movies, and so he founded that, and then he was everything a mayor should be, because he went on to be the mayor, very proactive, very progressive, very visionary, and then he served Newport in the State House. But then, after he sold the theater, he went over. He was out on a boat ride in his boat with two other couples, and he was over in the Georgeville section of Lake Memphremagog, very deep, and well over 100 feet. And he fell over, and they never found his body. And if you talk to people, this was the 1930s. That really stuck out in people of that generation. If you were born at that time, if you were alive during that time, that was a huge event. That some of these old people who grew up in Newport, that was a defining point. That was when former Mayor Burns died, and his body was, and then there was a little bit of intrigue. Did he drown? Or did he run off? And, well, I believe he drowned, but I've delved into that. But to tell you the truth is, I don't know much about the Georgeville section of the lake.
Well, and it's also like there's a reason why, BB, Derby Line, and Rock Island were called the three villages, right? It was considered almost one town. And families would just, would move freely from one side to the other, like Canadian side, American side. I dig through a lot of genealogy right now, and one decade they're in Canada, the second decade, the following decade they're in the States, they go back to Canada. It was very fluid, right? So you do see, and in the newspapers they would, it was a three villages section on the Stanza Journal. It was three villages. Same thing in Sherbrooke. There was old Sherbrooke newspapers would have, they would talk about Derby Line as if it was part of, almost Canada. So there is a lot of shared history for sure. You cannot. It's very hard to separate. You cannot separate the two, pretty much. So,
not to make it sound like we're the only ones doing it, recording history, because you have to admit there's a lot of good people. Whether it be like I work with Beth Cannell, and actually I think you've met Beth through the. She's a very astute history person, more focused on the Caledonia area, as is Sylvia Dodge, and like in Newport we have like Steenie Pepin and her sidekick, and it's escaping. Her name is Sandy McKinney. Yeah, they're doing a lot to preserve history, but I think what we do is we provide a forum to them and to other people to share their work with the rest of the world.
Yes, because I don't have a lot of archives in my house, right? Like I don't deal with that side.
No, I don't either.
I'll come and see them and scan with my phone and to then share it. And I'll try sometimes to put pieces together and try to find and use the same, right? Like we'll find a picture, we'll find something interesting in that picture, and we'll research, right? Fill the blanks, pretty much. So yeah, that's what the part that we do. We fill the blanks, but we also give a forum for people to share their stories. A lot of oral history is what you do, and people like to reminiscent and learn through my group as well. So that's what we do mostly, right? And it is needed.
And history isn't always pretty. There's some pretty gnarly bits of history. Like, for example, I don't know if you recall this. You once told me about when most people think about the pandemic, they either think of the 1918 pandemic, and now we can, talk about the COVID one. But you were the first person who told me about another pandemic, and since then somebody else has. I think you found where a whole family pretty much was wiped out. Do you remember offhand what year that was?
No, I don't. But I know in the 19th century, end of the 19th century for sure, there were a lot of, like you read a newspaper and it would say, like, I don't know, like Derby Academy is closed for the next 2 weeks because we have an epidemic going on, or there's been cases of this disease or that disease. And it was very common, yes, like that entire families would be wiped out. So we didn't have vaccines. We also did not know a lot about that kind of, like those kind of diseases and how they spread. Like there was a lot of misinformation. People also did not trust doctors. Still back in the days, so there was a lot of distrust. Poor people could not afford to see a doctor. It was a time to, so like people that were sick usually would just be in it, like in the kitchen, for instance, right, or in the living room, and everybody would be around them. And if you have like diseases like COVID, now that it's going to be spread. So that's how it would be spread throughout communities and families, right, and so on and so forth. So we had our share for sure of diseases in the past, and we tend to forget about it.
Yeah, because the one thing that I see and I hear all the time, but I see on your site,
the good old days.
The good old days.
The good old days.
The good old days. And everything was grander back in the good old days.
It's amazing.
And the thing is some things were good. But like I'll say, oh, you mean like back in the days where if you stepped on a rusty nail, you were probably going to die?
But I'm still wondering, I struggle to actually pinpoint what would be the good old days, because what is it? Is it like during the 30s where people were dying of hunger and they were eating skunks because or is it when women had no rights, and
and a lot of women died in childbirth,
and died of childbirth, or kids were dying, had a high chance of dying because of diseases. Which part of the history is the good old days? So, and I think it's because they look at pictures, they see how Newport looked very pretty, right? Like put back the Memphis Magog house, the Newport Hotel, and all those buildings. It looked, fine. Like not archaeology, but the architecture, good old days for architecture. But that's because that's usually what they see. They don't hear about how people actually lived, and that's what. It's one of the things I want to dig into, and it takes a little bit longer because the newspaper is not. Newspapers don't tell that, right? But it was hard. It was a hard time.
Right in Newport, and this is like almost any community, there was more or less a caste system, and you were expected to stay within that because the poor were supposed to be poor. It's like myself. I grew up in a place that is actually I'm proudly called Skunk Hollow, which was Clyde Street, and there are powers to be today who kind of wished I had just stayed within my lane. And so that classism, and I'm not saying just Newport, but there's still in rural Vermont a kind of a caste system where if you dare to step outside of that caste that has been made for you, you're going to get blowback. And personally, I love it because I like stepping outside my lane.
Well, I'm not from here, so I don't even know where the lanes are. Sometimes, we're from West Derby. Sometimes there is a little bit of that. I'm like, I don't even know what I get to cross all the borders, the imaginary borders they are. But people look at the the Newport and Main Street pictures, and they forget that there was the swamp, on the other side.
Yeah, the swamp.
So
Yeah, the city dump was in Gardner Park.
yeah.
And
So, like electricity reached a lot of cities in the Northeast Kingdom very late. So I think it was like 1940s, 50s, the last city got electricity.
some of the community, Newport and the bigger ones, Newport, Derby, now Newport and Barton and such, they had power way before other people did along the railroad line. But Jay is relative. There's still people alive out in Jay who vividly remember days before electricity, and we're almost done here. I think we need to make this a regular show, as in more often, because we could go on.
Oh yeah,
we could go on forever. Now, what is the name of your site and what is its address or?
So it's on Facebook, right? So if you if you search on Facebook Northeast Kingdom Roots, you're gonna find it. We have almost 10,000 members. The thing is, like, now Facebook has changed, so you can be a visitor. They call it visitor. People can come, comment, see everything without being an official member.
Oh, really?
So we have we have
do you know some people actually think we're a team on your site? It's your site.
It's my site.
But a lot of people actually, they comment to me and they ask me something. I say, you need to talk to Audrey. We just work together, but that's her site.
But that's good because they still don't know. They know how you look. They don't, like, a lot of people don't know how I look. So still, like, when I go outside, like, usually people don't recognize me. I know I went to an auction recently and then someone, like, shook my hand right away, and I got very scared for a second. I was like, oh my God, who's that guy? And he's like, I want to thank you for your site. I was like, whew. But then I was like, oh my God, how did you recognize me, right? It was someone from Island Pond. I forgot his name. But yeah, Northeast Kingdom Roots. So if you add the members and the visitors, we're over 11,000 people actually. That have joined or commented.
Yeah, I noticed it moves faster now. It seems like you were stuck for a little, and then all of a sudden.
I've always been growing, like I always check. But at one point, when I started like focusing sometimes on certain families, then family members would like invite each other, and there would be a spike. So yeah.
I think the one reason people are surprised is, I really think they think of you, they think the person behind it must be an older woman. And just because, whether you're a man or a woman, when you're in your 30s, you're not usually that interested in history. Like when I was in my 30s and doing this, I'd be hearing, wow, a kid like you interested in history? Because, a lot of times you don't get interested in history until it's almost too late to talk to your okay, well, we have got to wrap it up. What are your last words about just anything in general, history or
just
whatever?
People, like, if you're sad about what happened with the jail, right? Like, people need to get involved. Like, people need to join my group and get involved and ask questions, contact historical societies, join boards of historical societies, right? So we can preserve that history. If you have pictures that you want to share them to the world, they can contact me, they can contact you. But it shouldn't be just the two of us, right? It should be a community coming together and wanting to preserve the history. And we need more people to do that.
And boy, the history of this entire region is so deep, and it's wonderful. I get up every morning. I can't wait to work.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, thank you for coming on,
Thank
and
you.
I know you'll be back on. I know you have a real life on the side.
I do.
So it isn't always easy for you to take time off to come and chat, but I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.